Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named Two-Sentence Horror Stories, Season 3. Spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. The first story begins with a legend telling that a mysterious black backpack sometimes appears in one of the classrooms at this school. Inside the backpack lives a creepy ghost called Bagman. One day, Winton walked into the classroom, which was eerily empty. Suddenly, he felt a presence behind him and turned around to see his classmate, Z, staring at him. Terrified, Winton jumped in fright and nervously returned to his seat. Not long after, a student bully and a sidekick boy came in. The last to arrive was a sidekick girl, who immediately sat next to Winton, drawing envious glances from Z. The five of them weren't there for self-study. They were serving a detention. It turns out, the previous day during gym class, someone had secretly set off fireworks, causing panic throughout the school and forcing the principal to activate the lockdown system. The principal suspected these 5 students, and until the culprit confessed, they were to remain in detention. The principal confiscated their phones and left after issuing stern warnings, but his threats didn't scare anyone. The 5 students chatted and laughed, ignoring the oppressive atmosphere. Then, a pencil inexplicably rolled off a desk, and Winton noticed the black backpack shaking violently. Curious, he approached and opened it, only to see a pale face inside. He screamed in terror like a chicken, telling the others about the face in the backpack. Initially, they thought it was a prank, but Winton's frightened expression convinced Z to investigate. She picked up the backpack and slowly opened it, but let out a piercing chicken scream that sent chilling hormones down through their spine to their smelly butt. It turned out she was joking. The backpack was empty. Everyone began to doubt Winton and threw the backpack out the door. Hours of boredom passed in detention. The bully, becoming restless, started making noise and even covered the surveillance camera with stickers. The others were irritated by his behavior and complained about him when he left for the restroom. Even Z, who openly expressed her dislike for him. Unbeknownst to them, the bully was eavesdropping outside the door. Hearing Z express disdain for him shattered his heart, since Z was his crush, and he's long waiting to crush his hormones on her. Disheartened, he picked up the backpack and went to the bathroom, planning to pull a prank for revenge. While he was drawing a fake face, he didn't notice hands emerging from the backpack. A ghost, dressed in a suit and with a pale face, crawled out to flex his dirty claws, grabbed the bully and slammed him into the mirror. His duck screams brought the principal running, but by then, the bathroom was empty and the backpack lay in the hallway. The principal, thinking the bully had escaped, angrily returned the backpack to the classroom and left after warning the remaining 4 students. Staring at the backpack, Winton felt uneasy. As expected, the backpack began shaking again. Z, still skeptical, approached and opened it, only to reveal the bully's severed head. Everyone screamed in horror, and then the ghost emerged from the backpack, stabbing the sidekick boy to death, splattering blood all over and ending his sidekick life. The ghost was unexpectedly tall, and the remaining 3 students were terrified and hid in the storage room, blocking the door with a broom to avoid the ghost. In this life-or-death moment, Z tearfully confessed that she was behind the fireworks incident because she resented the sidekick girl for being with Winton, and that the bully had merely been her accomplice. Feeling emotional, Winton replied she could have just told him she liked him and didn't need to keep it to herself. However, Z retorted, revealing that she actually liked the sidekick girl, not Winton. Realizing he had overestimated his charm, Winton felt embarrassed. Z, feeling guilty for her prank that led to their friends' deaths, decided to use herself as bait to distract the bagman ghost, while Winton and the sidekick girl would move the backpack and seek help. The 3 students quietly peeked through the door crack and saw the ghost standing guard over the backpack, motionless. The backpack was its home, and no one could separate it from the bag. Summoning her courage, Z stepped out of the storage room, making noise to distract the ghost. Winton seized the opportunity to grab the backpack and lured the ghost into the storage room, quickly shutting the door. Meanwhile, the sidekick girl tore off the stickers covering the surveillance cameras and desperately called for help from the principal. The principal, who had been slacking off with his bald head, finally noticed the commotion in the classroom. Panicking, he pressed the alarm button, but accidentally triggered the lockdown system. The classroom lights went out, the doors and windows locked, turning it into a sealed room with no escape. The dark space was filled with the desperate screams of Winton and his friends as the ghost emerged from the storage room, its face twisted in a menacing grin, and advanced on its prey. Frantic, the principal couldn't override the lockdown system. The classroom's screams grew more chaotic until everything fell silent eventually. The second story begins with a transmasculine student. Elliot was a diligent student with a talent for music, but he suffered terrible bullying at school due to a congenital absence of male genitalia. In gym class, the teacher paired him with the girls, causing them to laugh at him. He endured this humiliation in silence. During music class, the teacher would mistakenly call him by a girl's name, and any attempt to correct it brought strange looks from his classmates. Both students and teachers treated him as a freak, isolating and mocking him, calling him neither male nor female. Every day at school was torture for Elliot. Whenever he saw the missing person posters around school, Elliot wished he could be the one who had disappeared, escaping his tormentors. One day in the boys' restroom, the principal cruelly mocked Elliot's condition and ordered him to use the girls' restroom instead. This unprovoked outburst was the last straw for Elliot. To escape, he hid in a basement marked "No Entry." The basement was dark and eerie, with flickering green lights, cold and decrepit. The floor was filthy and shadows seemed to flit across the broken glass. Elliot felt nervous and regretful. Suddenly, a piercing female scream echoed through the basement, making him tense up in fear and wet himself. He turned around to see a blurry figure behind him. It was just a janitor who was kinder than Elliot's teachers and classmates. The janitor, also lonely and friendless, quickly bonded with Elliot. She admired his musical talent and loved his compositions. As their friendship grew, Elliot confided in her about the bullying. Instead of offering comfort, the janitor handed him an ocarina, calling it a pain flute. She explained that by playing it and channeling his pain into the music, anyone who heard it would share in his suffering. However, the flute came at a cost. Elliot had to tear out a page from his music book as payment. It seemed a fair trade, so Elliot quickly agreed, tearing out a page and receiving the pain flute in return. After school, two girls approached Elliot to bully him again. They taunted him, threatening to put makeup on his face while dumping trash all over him. Elliot, fed up and unable to endure anymore, grabbed the pain flute and blew into it forcefully. The piercing sound made the girls collapse in pain, and they fled for their shitty lives in terror. For the first time, Elliot felt a sense of relief as he watched his tormentors run away. Later, he begged the janitor to let him keep the pain flute, but she demanded his entire music book in exchange. Elliot hesitated, staring at the book into which he had poured his heart and soul. However, memories of the relentless bullying made him finally hand it over, despite the pain it caused him. The next day, as Elliot was resting in the hallway, the brother of one of the girls stormed in, grabbed Elliot by the collar, and threatened to beat him up to avenge his sister. In the nick of time, Elliot blew the pain flute again. The same piercing sound filled the air, and the boy's hand twisted backward unnaturally. With a sickening crack, his bones broke, and he fell to the ground, writhing in agony. Horrified, Elliot fled the scene, not expecting the flute to cause such harm. Just a few steps away, the principal intercepts him. Convinced that Elliot is behind the recent injuries at school, the principal vows to punish him severely. Desperate to escape, Elliot blows the pain flute once more, and the principal's wrist twists and breaks, rendering him powerless. Elliot runs to the basement to find the janitor and demands an explanation. However, the janitor was nowhere to be found. When Elliot opened a storage locker, he was shocked to discover two bodies wrapped in spider silk, each holding a pain flute. On closer inspection, he realized they were the recently missing students. Terrified, Elliot collapsed to the floor, understanding that the janitor was a sinister witch. She targeted victims of bullying, luring them into harming others. The pain flute would gradually absorb their souls during their acts of revenge. Once their souls were trapped, the janitor would encase their bodies in spider silk as macabre trophies. Realizing he was next, Elliot's first instinct was to escape. Just then, the furious principal burst into the basement, wielding an iron rod, intent on killing Elliot. With no means of defense, Elliot resorted to the pain flute. This time, the principal's entire body contorted as every bone in his hands and legs snapped simultaneously. From the shadows, the janitor emerged, praising Elliot for learning to protect himself. Ignoring her, Elliot grabbed the rod and smashed the pain flute. The janitor, panicking, pulled out the music book, pleading with him to stop. Unmoved, Elliot struck the flute again, shattering it into onion pieces. The janitor let out a desperate scream as her body slowly faded away, disappearing completely. With the janitor gone, the locker suddenly stirred. The two students trapped by the janitor began to regain consciousness, unharmed. From that day on, the three outcasts became close friends, often standing together against school bullying. With the arrival of a new principal, Elliot's life improved significantly, and he gradually became a cheerful and outgoing person. Time flew by, and decades later, Elliot had grown old. Though he had transitioned from a student to an elderly man, he never forgot about the janitor witch, and it seemed the witch had never forgotten him either. The last scene seems to hint that Elliot had killed many victims and kept their bodies in the basement as his companions. The third story begins with a woman who was engrossed in reading a letter when she suddenly felt a knife pressed against her back. A robber's voice whispered in her waxy ear, asking her to give him her bag. Terrified, the woman placed her bag down and nervously handed it over. Fortunately, the robber took the bag and began to retreat without further harming her sexy body. The woman sighed in relief, thinking the robber must be impotent. However, as she turned around, the robber lunged and stabbed her in the chest, but spared her sexy body. She clutched her chest in shock and pain before collapsing in a pool of blood. Outside, Annika witnessed the entire murder scene but remained unmoved. It turns out the conversation and struggle between the woman and the robber were all part of her vivid imagination. Annika was an avid fan of crime novels, frequently daydreaming about murder scenarios and becoming deeply absorbed in them. Just as she was lost in her thoughts of the robber's crime spree, a phone call demanding rent payment jolted her back to reality. Realizing her dire financial situation, Annika quickly accepted a part-time job painting walls. In the afternoon, she arrived at the home of the male homeowner. Only the man, Patrick, was there. He was very polite and had prepared all the painting supplies for her. Annika approached the wall, knelt down, and was about to start working when the sound of a camera shutter clicked from behind her. It turned out Patrick was taking photos. Annika felt nervous and annoyed, despite Patrick's explanation that he was photographing the wall. She had clearly seen the camera aimed directly at her. Realizing he had caused a misunderstanding, Patrick hurried back to his room to avoid further suspicion. But Annika's unease remained. Convinced there was something off about this man, she wanted to finish her work quickly and leave. While looking for a paint stick, she opened Patrick's storage cabinet and found several masks stuffed inside. She imagined Patrick committing crimes while wearing these masks. Then, as she searched for a cup, she stumbled upon a cabinet full of medicine vials and syringes. She was certain these were tools Patrick used for his crimes. Just as she was holding her breath, thinking she had made a significant discovery, someone tapped her on the shoulder. It was Patrick, who had found her snooping. He angrily demanded to know what she was doing. Before Annika could explain, Patrick saw the stash of medications and syringes. His expression quickly shifted from anger to sorrow. It turned out Patrick's wife had passed away from cancer, and these were the medications she had used. Unable to part with them, he kept them as mementos. Realizing she had unintentionally reopened Patrick's wounds, Annika felt a pang of guilt. She stopped her wild imaginings and focused entirely on her painting work. At that moment, a blood-stained brooch under the stool caught her eye. Even more strangely, one of the stool's legs had inexplicably broken. These clues reignited her imagination. In her mind, she pictured Patrick sitting on the stool, pinning his beautiful wife down so she couldn't move, and using the stool's leg to suffocate her. This horrifying scenario terrified Annika herself. But once Pandora's box is opened, it cannot be closed. Patrick's wife began to appear frequently in Annika's imagination, urging her to flee the house or risk a terrible fate, perhaps being raped, poisoned, or tortured to death like her. These hallucinations overwhelmed Annika, making it hard for her to breathe. Yet, strapped for cash, she didn't want to give up the job. So, she remained on high alert. If she heard Patrick laughing, her nerves would tense. When he invited her for a drink, she immediately refused. Even when Patrick accidentally cut his finger while cooking and needed her help to bandage it, she kept her distance. However, while Annika was cleaning the kitchen, she found a woman's fingernail in a crevice. The sight of it conjured a vivid image of Patrick's wife being violently dragged, screaming and clawing at the cabinet door. At that moment, Annika's paranoia finally exploded. She quietly called the police and then made an excuse to leave, claiming she needed to go home. Unexpectedly, Patrick immediately blocked her way, scolding her for her lack of professionalism. In a bid to escape, Annika sprayed him in the face with pepper spray. As she opened the door, the police had already arrived. Annika quickly accused Patrick of trying to kill her. However, it was embarrassing for her when she realized she had no evidence. The fingernail and syringes were all just speculations. Feeling helpless, she suddenly noticed something odd in the wall photos. She was sure there was something hidden behind them. She quickly pulled them down, but found nothing behind them. The police, tired of her dramatics, were ready to arrest her for making a false report. Surprisingly, Patrick stepped in and spoke on her behalf, convincing the police to let her go. After the police left, Annika felt both grateful and guilty. She knew her paranoid sensitivity had caused trouble for Patrick, but Patrick seemed unfazed and told her she should trust her instincts. Annika instantly felt something was off. When she looked down, she saw a stack of photographs had fallen from behind the wall photos. They were just like her, other women painting walls, secretly photographed by Patrick. The images of torn clothes and dismembered bodies were horrifying. It turned out Patrick really was a deranged killer who loved murdering women. Terrified, Annika tried to flee, but Patrick grabbed her and cornered her, knife in hand. In a desperate moment, Annika pulled out the hammer she had prepared and struck him hard on the temple, killing him instantly. Looking at Patrick's lifeless body, she realized the importance of self-protection, even if her suspicions were unfounded. Annika's wild imaginations were not baseless. They stemmed from her extraordinary sense. The fourth story begins with a financial advisor, Charles, working at a publicly traded company. He worked diligently and achieved outstanding performance, qualifying him for a position on the board. However, his awkward status as an Asian made him a target of discrimination by the entire board. It wasn't for any other reason than the fact that he was of Asian descent. Despite Charles's high position and hard work, others still saw him as a dull and incompetent Asian man. Fortunately, Charles's efforts paid off when he won a prestigious business award. This accolade was enough to change the board's perception of him completely. He placed great importance on the award ceremony, even inviting his mother and sister to attend. His sister gladly agreed and suggested that he bring the family heirloom with him when receiving the award. However, as soon as the heirloom was placed in Charles's hand, a vivid image flashed in his mind: a man with closed eyes, spitting blood. To his horror, the man was himself. Shaken by the vision, Charles was startled when his mother approached and slapped him, demanding to know who he was. Feeling wronged, Charles was about to explain when he realized that his mother's dementia must have flared up again. It was strange because she always remembered him, but whenever they faced each other, she never seemed to recognize him. With the award ceremony imminent, Charles couldn't ponder the oddity any longer and hurriedly left home, tossing the eerie heirloom back on the table. As soon as he walked out, the heirloom shattered, releasing a faint red mist. From within, a man with a straw hat and a military knife emerged. Back at the company, Charles nervously prepared his acceptance speech while the board members drank and chatted. Feeling out of place, Charles excused himself to get some wine from his car. The deserted parking lot was eerily quiet. As he retrieved the wine, all the car horns suddenly blared, paralyzing Charles with fear. A dark figure darted past in the corner of his eye, and a bizarrely dressed man emerged from the shadows, raising a military knife to strike Charles. Terrified, Charles collapsed to the ground, realizing the man had his exact face. Overwhelmed with fear, he scrambled to his stinky feet and fled for his shitty life, accidentally running into a passing security guard. When he looked back, the strange man had vanished, much to Charles's relief. With only 10 minutes left until the awards ceremony, Charles hurriedly tidied himself up and rushed to the hall. Upon entering, he realized that all the guests were already seated. It was Charles's turn to go on stage and receive his award, and the audience erupted in applause. Just as he was about to step forward, he noticed that no one seemed to acknowledge his presence. Anxious and eager, he was stunned to see the strange man from before claiming the award that was rightfully his. The man's bizarre appearance left the audience silent. He lacked any semblance of a business professional and wore an exaggerated, foolish grin. Finally, the guests couldn't contain themselves and burst into mocking laughter. The chairman of the board was furious and scolded the man for dressing so inappropriately for the ceremony. Unexpectedly, the strange man shoved the chairman to the ground and attempted to attack him. Guests rushed to the stage to intervene, and seeing the situation turn against him, the man fled through a side door. Humiliated by the man's antics, Charles felt a surge of anger. Grabbing a knife, he chased after the man and finally cornered him in a corridor. A fierce confrontation ensued. Suddenly, a voice interrupted their fight. It was Charles's mother, who approached the man with a concerned look. Charles panicked, desperately pleading with his mother not to go near him. Ignoring Charles, she called out her son's name and embraced the man tightly. In an instant, the man dropped his knife and returned the hug with a sorrowful expression. Trembling with rage, Charles couldn't believe that this strange man had so easily replaced him. Overcome with fury, Charles lunged forward and stabbed the man multiple times. Strangely, no wounds appeared on the man's chest, and there was no blood splatter. As the man fell, blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, and Charles suddenly recalled the bloody vision he had seen when he touched the family heirloom. At that moment, other employees arrived on the scene, all staring at Charles in shock. His mother wailed in grief nearby. Desperate and confused, Charles tried to explain that he hadn't killed anyone. His voice grew weaker as he turned to see his own pale, lifeless face in the mirror. It was then that he finally understood everything. Charles suffered from severe split personality disorder. The man in the straw hat represented his former self, free, bold, and rebellious before coming to America. The man in the suit represented the persona crushed by discrimination, working tirelessly under immense pressure. He worked so hard, but when he realized he was killing himself, it was too late. The two personalities battled constantly, and in the end, the suit-wearing man killed his former self. But he too was overwhelmed, ultimately destroyed by reality. Sometimes all we can do is silently endure. The fifth story takes place at a late night when Doyle was still working overtime at the factory. He was diligent and hard-working. As he worked, a roll of tape rolled into a corner. He reached into the crevice to retrieve it but couldn't grasp it, so he reluctantly pulled his hand back. After adjusting the goods, he tried again, but something bit his hand. He didn't think much of it and simply bandaged the wound before continuing his work with full dedication. However, in a corner of the factory that Doyle hadn't noticed, several rat corpses lay in a heap, each one dead with black blood oozing from their mouths. Meanwhile, in the nearby office, the boss and the female manager were in a heated argument. The company had not met its targets for the year and all bonuses were lost. To meet the targets, the entire production line had to operate day and night, beyond its capacity. In the end, they agreed on an inhumane plan. Lock the workers inside until the targets were met, allowing no one to leave. The workers were unaware of this. Soon, Doyle's colleague noticed something was wrong with him. Doyle's efficiency tonight was 3 times his usual rate, like a cold machine that never stopped. When the colleague touched his own nose, he found a white, latex-like liquid seeping out. The thick mucus smeared on the toys he was packing, but he didn't notice. The colleague jokingly asked why Doyle was suddenly so diligent, but the usually talkative Doyle remained silent. The colleague thought he might be wearing earphones, so he reached out to tap him. Unexpectedly, Doyle pounced on him like a wild beast, roaring and biting fiercely. The factory quickly descended into chaos and panic. Team leader Tina urgently requested to stop the production. Doyle had gone mad and needed to be sent to the hospital immediately. However, the manager strongly opposed stopping the work, saying one person going mad is nothing, but if they don't meet the targets, they will all lose their jobs. Tina had no choice but to lock the crazed Doyle in the office to prevent further incidents. She then led the other employees back to work. Just after dealing with Doyle, Tina heard strange noises from a corner. She cautiously approached and found the colleague gnawing on something. To her horror, he was eating a co-worker's corpse. She panicked, realizing that the issue wasn't just Doyle going mad. He had contracted a virus and was spreading it. At the same time, the manager noticed the factory's unusual atmosphere. Everyone was working feverishly without rest or communication, barely even breathing. Puzzled, she approached to ask what was going on, but the workers' faces suddenly twisted in rage, and they lunged at her sexy body without hormone mercy. She struggled to escape and ran into Tina, who was being attacked by the colleague. The manager grabbed a fire extinguisher and struck the colleague's head, knocking him down. Tina cautiously checked if he was dead, but white liquid flowed from his ears, and he vomited black blood before dying. They immediately thought of the locked-up Doyle. Sure enough, he was also dead as shit, with black blood and white liquid oozing from his mouth and nose. Tina panicked, realizing they needed to escape. The manager hesitated, revealing that the factory was locked and could only be opened with a password, restricting their freedom. Furious, Tina ignored the manager and began to leave. The manager, feeling responsible, followed her to check the situation. The gas tanks had been tampered with by the crazed workers, and the toxic fumes spread everywhere. All the employees were collapsed at their stations, lifeless. Tina was trapped, terrified, and attempting to escape quietly. However, her movements woke the workers. In a critical moment, the manager covered Tina, helping her into the office. They locked the doors and drew the curtains, temporarily safe. Seeing the zombie-like employees outside, they knew hiding wouldn't last. They had to escape the factory. The manager remembered a note in the drawer with the door password. As she excitedly retrieved it, Tina looked at her in horror. White liquid was seeping from the manager's nose, and Tina's ears were leaking the same. They stared at each other, feeling hopeless. It was clear they both had been infected with the virus. At this moment, the gas was spreading more intensely. Feeling utterly hopeless, Tina pulled out a lighter, contemplating ending everything with an explosion. However, she hesitated, unable to press the switch. Suicide wasn't easy with family ties. The manager felt the same. Overcome with thoughts of her son, she ran toward the main gate. Hearing the commotion, the workers charged at her like zombies, intending to have a zombie baby with her. Just as they were about to overwhelm her, she managed to input the correct password, and the door swung open. But at the last moment, her sense of responsibility overcame her survival instinct. She did not escape. Instead, she locked the door again from the inside. She didn't want the deadly virus to spread in the city, choosing self-destruction instead. Meanwhile, Tina, resolute in her fate, finally pressed the lighter. The factory exploded in flames, engulfing the entire building. No one survived. Cut to a boy eagerly unwrapping his Christmas present, only to find a strange white liquid on his toy. As he tried to wipe it off, the odd substance wouldn't come off, suggesting more terror was on its way. The sixth story begins with the man, Jackson, who had a happy family. One day he was pushing his elderly parents on the swings, and his sister was laughing joyfully nearby. Suddenly, the horrific sound of a car crash echoed. His parents' faces became bloodied and mangled, and his sister started screaming hysterically. Jackson tried to scream too, but everything spun around. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in his bright bedroom, with his boyfriend's concerned voice in his ears. It had all been a nightmare. It was the second year since his parents died in a car accident. After their death, Jackson had planned to rely on his sister, his only remaining family, to restart his life. However, his sister fell into a deep depression, turning to alcohol, spiraling into self-destruction. Over time, their relationship grew strained, and Jackson distanced himself from her. They stopped communicating altogether, but this nightmare brought back memories of his sister. After much hesitation, he decided to visit her. The living room was empty, with faint noises coming from upstairs. The dark room had the TV on, but no one was around. Suddenly, a shadow flitted across the mirror. His sister was sitting on the couch, staring at him, her face unusually calm, different from her previous negativity. She expressed no resentment for his abandonment. However, Jackson still harbored a grudge, unable to forget that she had sold their father's beloved watch for drugs. They sat in a tense silence, the air thick with awkwardness. Finally, Jackson got up and went to his room. While rummaging through the house, he accidentally found a book about demons. Alarmed, he angrily questioned his sister about joining a cult. She laughed and reassured him, saying she had been normal for a while now because someone has been keeping her company. Thinking she had a new boyfriend, Jackson felt something was off with her unusually calm demeanor. Troubled, he went to the bathroom to shower, only to find blood pouring from the shower head. Terrified, he rushed out, but upon closer inspection realized it was just his imagination. Still shaken, he then heard his sister's desperate screams for mercy, as if someone was brutally attacking her. Jackson burst into her room, finding chaos and no sign of a third person. The ceiling was marked with a ritualistic symbol. Gazing at it, Jackson suddenly felt dizzy and lost consciousness. Upon waking, his sister confessed to Jackson that she had performed a ritual in her room last night. She claimed that she had merged with a demon and could no longer feel any pain. She spoke with delight as she chewed on white maggots she had cooked, savoring them. This sight filled Jackson with both fear and disgust. He was certain his sister was deeply possessed and tried to drag her away from the place. Suddenly, the doors and windows locked themselves. His sister's pupils rolled back as she laughed maniacally, then violently twisted his arm until it broke. Jackson screamed in pain and fled to the next room, trembling with fear. He had never felt so terrified of his own sister, who now seemed more horrifying than any lunatic. But then, the manic laughter outside abruptly ceased, replaced by the sound of soft sobbing like a little chicken. Jackson's heart softened. If he hadn't deliberately distanced himself years ago, his sister wouldn't have ended up like this. Overcome with guilt, he left the room, trying to comfort her while holding her hand. She squeezed his hand back, but then her face twisted with rage. She called him a hypocrite and kicked him unconscious. When Jackson regained consciousness, he found himself lying in a ritual circle, with his sister conducting a ceremony around him. Candlelight flickered, and yellow paper charms floated in the air. She was trying to lure him into submitting to the demon, promising a life without pain. Jackson could feel the demon invading his body and his sanity slipping away. He struggled desperately, grabbing his cross necklace and plunging it into his sister's chest. The cross began to burn, and after a piercing scream, her face returned to normal. Jackson knew his sister was finally back. He held her, but she was barely breathing. She looked at him with immense regret, admitting she shouldn't have taken drugs or strayed off the right path. There had been no demon all along. The real demon was the drugs. She died in Jackson's arms. Sometime later, Jackson's boyfriend arrived and found him pale and deeply unconscious. After being resuscitated, Jackson finally awoke, but his sister was nowhere to be found. It turned out she had been dead for over a week due to a drug overdose, and the room was littered with syringes and powder. Jackson had been a drug addict himself 2 years prior, but had managed to get clean and return to a normal life. However, upon finding his sister's corpse days earlier, his guilt over neglecting her all those years had driven him depressed. The toxic bliss made him forget his pain but pushed him to the brink of death. Fortunately, his boyfriend had saved him just in time. The 7th story begins with a young girl, Mina, working at a beauty salon where she is responsible for giving pedicures and massages to VIP customers. Her techniques are always praised by the clients, and the salon's business is thriving, thanks largely to the secret formula created by the salon owner. However, the supervisor doesn't seem to like Mina. One morning, she found Mina shaving her legs in the restroom and not properly sanitizing afterwards. The supervisor was quick to fire her, but the glamorous salon owner is very fond of Mina. She praised Mina's skills, noting how much the clients loved her, and pointed out that Mina had nowhere else to go. She argued that it wasn't necessary to make Mina homeless over a small mistake. The owner's strong defense left the supervisor speechless, and she even arranged for Mina to have a dormitory room. Mina's new roommate, Tran, was friendly and supportive. Both being far from home, they bonded and supported each other. They shared a common dream, to earn more money and become independent women like the salon owner, no longer living a life of uncertainty. One night, Mina felt an intense itch all over her body. When she lifted her shirt, she discovered large, festering sores on her abdomen. She screamed in terror, only to wake up and realize it had been a nightmare. Life at the beauty salon passed quickly. A few months later, Mina's skin began to itch and peel. Tran mentioned that many of the girls had similar symptoms, likely due to an allergic reaction to chemicals in the serum. The troublesome supervisor started giving Tran a hard time, forcing her to take on new clients. Oddly, after massaging a new client, Tran left the salon exhausted and unsteady. Mina noticed the supervisor making a deal with the cleaning lady outside, exchanging a bag of strange items. She tried to capture the scene on her phone, but the salon owner appeared suddenly behind her. The kind-hearted owner remarked on Mina's poor complexion, then gently applied some of her personal serum to Mina's face and even generously gave her a bottle. Over the next few days, Mina and Tran's health continued to deteriorate. Some colleagues even took sick leave. Mina observed the supervisor swapping out the serum and locking the replaced bottles in a cabinet. Mina's skin started to fester, and Tran eventually collapsed from exhaustion. Lying in her hospital bed, Tran explained that beauticians serving VIP clients typically lasted only a year or two before falling ill for various reasons. Strangely, she had never seen senior employees get fired or quit. They seemed to vanish without a trace. Many were homeless or had grown up in foster care, so no one noticed when they disappeared. Mina gasped in horror. Since she started serving VIP clients, she too had felt unwell. She suspected the culprit was the serum used for VIP customers. The formula was a closely guarded secret, but every time it was applied, clients would leave looking radiant, while the beauticians became increasingly exhausted and developed severe skin issues. That night, Mina took a bold risk and sneaked into the beauty salon, hoping to steal a bottle of serum for testing. Suddenly, she heard a noise outside and hid in a corner. She saw the salon owner carrying a box, looking incredibly old and wrinkled, nothing like the beautiful woman she appeared to be during the day. The owner opened a cabinet, took out a bottle of serum, and added the girl's skin flakes into it. Then she opened her box and took out bloody flesh, which she began to devour with relish. Terrified, Mina recorded the scene and sent the video to Tran. The owner noticed Mina. It turned out she was a witch who siphoned off the girls' youth, causing them to weaken, their skin to dry out and flake. The cleaning lady meticulously collected these skin flakes and sold them to the supervisor. These flakes were then added to the secret serum, allowing the clients to absorb the girls' vitality and appear radiant. Meanwhile, the girls, drained of their essence, grew weaker and eventually died. The owner would then skin and dismember the deceased young employees, consuming their flesh to maintain her own youth. After the revelation, the owner offered Mina a deal, asking her to keep this secret, and in return, she would kill the supervisor and make Mina her new assistant. Mina refused, preferring death, but she soon lost consciousness due to her weakened state. The next morning, the owner visited the dormitory to see the ailing Tran. She brought the news that Mina had been fired for theft. She offered Tran a raise, hoping she would return to work. Tran, doubting Mina was capable of such a crime, checked her phone after the owner left and found the photos Mina had sent the previous night. The photos showed the aged owner devouring the girl's flesh. Furious and determined, Tran knew Mina must have met a terrible fate. 3 weeks later, a rejuvenated Tran became the new owner of the beauty salon. She and her friends regained their health and achieved their dreams with the salon. The serum still used the original formula, but with a twist that the witch owner was locked in a hidden room. Each day, Tran would take a piece of the witch's flesh to mix into the salon's signature serum. The same formula, the same results. The 8th story begins with a little girl, Laura, who would often have a recurring nightmare. In it, there was a torrential downpour and the sudden crash of a car. Jolted awake by the nightmare, she would call for her mother and head to the morgue. Her mother was working on a body. This time, the deceased was an 8-year-old boy wearing green shoes. Such a young life, like a flower, made her mother sigh with regret. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered. A man in scrubs named Antonio was her mother's colleague. He took Laura away, advising her not to disturb her mother's work. It turned out Laura had had a big argument with her mother and ran out. She worried her mother was still angry at her. Antonio told Laura to stay put and not wander off while he went to attend to his work. Antonio stayed by her mother's side. It was said the boy had hidden in a car trunk and died of heat stroke when the trunk was locked. It was a tragic story. Just then, the boy's cries echoed from outside, sending chills down Laura's spine to her butt. She found the boy crying in a corner. As the overhead lights flickered again, the boy looked up, revealing a terrifying face. Scared, Laura hid under her blankets. She asked Antonio if ghosts were real, and why her mother always said they were just stories to scare people. Antonio explained that ghosts were often pitiful, lingering in the human world because of unresolved issues. In the office, Laura's mother was arguing with her father. She was always so stubborn, unwilling to communicate with him. The flickering lights added to the morgue's eerie atmosphere. No one else could see the boy's ghost, only innocent Laura. Following the cries again, she wanted to listen to the boy's troubles and help him find peace. Busy with work, her mother couldn't look after Laura. During a moment of downtime, Laura's mother sat nearby, talking to herself, blaming Laura for never listening. Seeing her mother was still angry, Laura sulked back to her room. Suddenly, the boy's ghost appeared on her bed, scaring her into a corner. But soon, the ghost vanished. In a daze, the rain and crash sounds from her nightmare kept flashing through her mind. Laura wondered what the boy wanted and why he kept scaring her. She went to the morgue where the boy's father had arrived and was crying helplessly over his son's body. The boy's ghost appeared next to Laura, who watched as he hugged his father. Antonio, who could also see the ghost, explained to Laura that the boy didn't realize he was dead and thought his father had abandoned him, hence his frightening appearance. Now, with his father's presence, the boy finally found peace. Antonio revealed that his job was to help lost souls in the morgue. He also confessed that he was a ghost. Most ghosts didn't realize they were dead, much like Laura, who had been wandering the morgue for years. It turns out, on a stormy night years ago, Laura had argued with her mother and stormed out, only to be hit by a speeding car. After her death, her mother shut herself off emotionally, burying herself in work. Every year on the Day of the Dead, Laura would return to the morgue. Antonio always tried to help her reconcile with her mother, but Laura's stubbornness thwarted every attempt. In the office, her mother once again thought of Laura, tapping out a love message with a pin on the desk. This time, Laura responded with the flickering lights. She loved her mother, and her words of hatred were just her stubbornness. Watching her mother weep like a giant baby, Laura gently kissed her cheek. Her mother seemed to feel Laura's presence and began to apologize for being so stubborn. Finally, mother and daughter reconciled. Guided by Antonio, Laura left the morgue and found peace, finally. However, many children with stories like Laura's continue to linger in the morgue. Her story plays out repeatedly. Many parents often refuse to let go of their pride and communicate with their children, creating a divide as if they live in two different worlds. But in a family, there's no conflict that can't be resolved. Sometimes all it takes is to speak your heart. The 9th story takes place on a late night when a girl, N.A., came home from work and found her front door open. Cautiously, she inspected every corner of the house, only to discover her twin sister, Adaora, was the one who had come in. Ine, a hard-working full-time nurse and an atheist, contrasted with her superstitious sister, who had set up a shrine at home with offerings for an unknown wooden deity. Adaora dug out a bedtime storybook from their childhood. One of the stories told of a pair of very close twin brothers who communicated through a unique twin telepathy until one day the younger brother tragically died from illness. From then on, the older brother continually heard his deceased brother's voice in his mind. The story wasn't finished when Adaora suddenly felt an intense headache and had to close the book and return to her bedroom, leaving Ene alone in the living room to study late into the night. That night, Ene dreamed of Adaora sitting by the fireplace, her face half covered in blood, revealing a ghastly eyeball. Startled awake, Ene rushed to Adaora's room and found her twin sister writhing in pain from a stroke. She immediately took her to the hospital. However, the doctor, who had seen many patients, was indifferent to Adaora's condition. Ine couldn't help but confront the doctor, and during their argument, Adaora's heart rate suddenly spiked, causing her to collapse from the bed in pain. Due to the delayed medical response, Adaora's basilar artery stroke left her in a vegetative state forever. Had the doctor acted sooner, this could have been avoided. To make matters worse, the doctor shamelessly suggested transferring Adaora to a hospice care center. Thus, Ine had no choice but to settle her sister in a nursing home. Little did Ine know that although her sister couldn't speak or move, Adaora was fully conscious. She clearly saw a terrifying monster hiding by the next bed. Terrified, she couldn't call out to her sister for help. Life for the patients in the nursing home was poor. With only 2 nurses for 30 patients, the bedridden elderly developed bed sores from the lack of assistance. The management didn't care about their well-being. Thankfully, Ene stayed by her sister's side. It said that twins have a special telepathic bond, and the nurse encouraged Ene to try communicating with Adaora, hoping that one day it might bring her back. Late one night, Adaora saw the monster by the neighboring bed again. The terrifying creature slowly emerged from the corner and climbed onto the adjacent bed. At the same time, Ene, asleep at home, had a nightmare. In her dream, her sister was wearing a red cloak and was frantically beating her bed. The next morning, while Ene was massaging Adaora, she suddenly heard her sister's voice in her mind. Adaora was desperately calling out for help. The old lady in the next bed, speaking in a mystical tone, told Ene that once the monster was done with her, Adaora would be next. Ene dismissed the old lady's words as dying bullshit and didn't take them seriously. As night fell, the monster predictably climbed onto the old lady's bed. It grabbed her collar and sucked out her soul. The weak old lady didn't satisfy the monster, so it turned its gaze toward Adaora's bed. Terrified, Adaora could only reach out to her sister at home through their mental connection. She transformed into a deity in a red cloak, controlling her sister's body to open the bedtime storybook and forcing Ine to continue reading the story of the 2 brothers. She tried to make her sister understand that not only did twins have a mental connection, but their souls could also interchange. The monster was already on Adaora's bed. Ine sensed her sister's despair and quickly grabbed the deity from the shrine, rushing to the hospital. The monster was trying to drain Adaora's soul. Unable to enter the room, Ine cried out to the deity for help. After a heart-wrenching cry, Ine collapsed outside the hospital room. Her soul entered Adaora's body. Empowered, Adaora grabbed a vase and smashed it at the monster, but it had no effect. As the creature was about to consume her soul, Adaora grabbed a shard of the vase and slashed at the monster's throat. Awakening, she managed to fend off the monster. Dragging her paralyzed legs, she crawled towards her sister at the door. A few days later, Adaora sat in a wheelchair. The nurse said her recovery was nothing short of a miracle. Ene remained silent but smiled. It was her unwavering support that pulled her sister back from the brink of death. Now, the sisters could communicate through their mental connection. Ene no longer mocked her sister's superstitions and even helped her clean the altar daily. One day, the monster unexpectedly appeared behind the window. Ine shot it a fierce look, swearing that she was awake, but the monster was still snarling at her. The 10th story begins with a sheriff pointing his gun at a young Native American, ready to pull the trigger. Suddenly, the sheriff's daughter rushes in, stopping her father. It turns out she and the young man are lovers. Unable to resist his daughter's pleas, the sheriff puts away his gun. Eventually, he and the young man reconcile, turning enemies into friends. Applause erupts from the surrounding crowd, revealing that the scene was just a reenactment of the town's history. A young boy, Jeremy, stands holding a microphone, unsure of what to say. His wife, Rosalie, takes notes beside him. They've traveled to this small town to collect information about its customs, culture, and history. The actress guides them to the cemetery, where the sheriff, his daughter, and the young Native American are all buried. They have become part of the town's history. Jeremy, also a Native American, doesn't feel at ease here, especially seeing white people dressed in his people's attire, romanticizing past atrocities. The lead actor, who plays the young Native American, approaches Jeremy to shake hands. Jeremy inadvertently reveals a tattoo on his arm, explaining it's a tribal symbol. The lead actor asks Jeremy to teach him some Native American techniques, but annoyed, Jeremy shoves his smelly ass away. In the commotion, Jeremy cuts his hand on a metal gravestone, and his blood splatters onto the sheriff's headstone. In an instant, time in the town seems to freeze. The actors, who were laughing and chatting just a moment ago, now stand motionless, as if possessed. Two of them help Jeremy back to the town, but the once bustling streets are now empty. A girl watches them with a terrified expression before running away, seemingly hitting an invisible barrier. Unaware of her strange behavior, they tend to Jeremy's wound. The lead actor removes his wig, preparing for the next scene, a wedding. Rosalie takes out an antique wedding dress, intending to replace the actress as the bride. She also brings out the young Native American's attire for Jeremy to try on. The moment Jeremy puts on the clothes, he becomes paralyzed, with a terrifying voice cursing Native Americans echoing in his mind. The lead actor quickly removes the clothes, and a shaken Jeremy insists something is wrong with the town and wants to leave. However, Rosalie convinces him to stay until she finishes her research. When they retrieve their phones, they find them all damaged, intentionally cutting off their contact with the outside world. Jeremy asks the actress what really happened in the town. She explains that their performance is a sanitized version of history. The sheriff's daughter was promiscuous and blamed a Native American youth to avoid her father's wrath. Enraged, the sheriff and his men massacred the town's Native Americans and even killed the white residents who opposed the slaughter. The town was drenched in blood, and the sheriff's violent spirit never dissipated with his death. During the earlier commotion, Jeremy's Native American blood awakened the sheriff's spirit. The sheriff and his men's souls possessed the actors, initiating a new massacre. Meanwhile, Rosalie and the lead actor discover the actors' bodies, pursued relentlessly by those possessed by the sheriff. History repeats itself as the sheriff and his men kill all the actors playing the townspeople, leaving bodies strewn across the town and screams filling the air. The four survivors hide while trying to find a way to escape. Jeremy grabs an axe for protection, unaware it's an antique. Anything belonging to the town carries the sheriff's violent spirit. Jeremy is instantly overwhelmed by the spirit, with a voice in his head urging him to kill everyone. He raises the axe against his friends, who can only scream and run from the possessed Jeremy. Jeremy, in his frantic chase, unexpectedly encounters the sheriff. The sheriff, filled with hatred for Native Americans, raises his axe, and the two engage in a fierce battle. With superior skill, Jeremy knocks the sheriff unconscious with a single blow. Just as he is about to deliver the final strike, the tattoo on his arm awakens him. This tattoo symbolizes the beliefs of his people. Regaining his senses, Jeremy drops the axe and embraces his wife. However, a new challenge arises. An invisible barrier surrounds the town, preventing their escape. Jeremy suddenly realizes that his friends are wearing clothes from the town. Anything from the town cannot be taken out. They all strip off their clothes and manage to leave the town joyfully, except for Rosalie, who is stopped. It turns out her bag contains the veil of the sheriff's daughter. Jeremy accidentally finds the sheriff's old diary, which clearly documents the town's history. It turns out, as a journalist, Rosalie had brought Jeremy back to his homeland with the hidden agenda of stealing the diary to publish it for fame. However, she hadn't anticipated that Jeremy's blood would awaken the sheriff. Despite the deaths and the current danger, Rosalie still refuses to abandon the diary. Seeing Rosalie's true nature, Jeremy reluctantly places the antique veil on her. Instantly, she seems possessed, screaming for help and attempting to kill Jeremy. Stepping out of the town's barrier, Jeremy looks back at Rosalie's grotesque face and walks away, leaving without a trace. Rosalie remains in the town, showing that at her core, she is no different from the evil white settlers. Their marriage was a complete lie, with Rosalie marrying him only to exploit his family's history for her own gain. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.